My name is Anthony Bogues. I am a professor at Brown University, humanities professor. I am a professor of African diaspora thought, as well as a professor of African and African diaspora art. And I am the inaugural director for the Brown University's Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice. Brown University is considered to be one of the Ivy League universities, which means that it is an elite university. But Ivy League also only means actually it was formed in the 1700s. There are 8 Ivy League universities: Harvard, Princeton, Brown, Yale, as the ones that, including amongst them are Columbia University, Harvard University, Brown, Princeton, University of Pennsylvania, and Brown is one of those. But it is the Ivy League really only has to do with the early formation of the university in the American colonial republic. That's what you're looking at. I'm in Senegal because I convene a UNESCO project called Mapping the Cost of Global Anti-Black Racism. And what is the heart of that project? The heart of that project is to think about how anti-black racism emerged at a certain historic moment in the human species. It emerged at a moment of racial slavery and European colonialism. And it became an order in which essentially blackness was a mark of inferiority. Blackness was to be black meant that you were disposable, that you were a lack, that you were not a human being. And all of that really created a social order in quite frankly, in various parts of the world. And what we are trying to do is to say, okay, years after emancipation of slavery, years after the colonial European project has not come to a full end, because there are some places in the world that are still colonies, frankly. We tend to forget that. But that after, post 1945, when the European colonial project was on the retreat, that we still have the consequences of anti-black racism. Anti-black racism still structures people's daily lives. It means what kind of jobs they can have. It means what kind of education they can have. It means what's the access to health care. But also, very importantly, it also means that many black people don't consider themselves to be proud of themselves. That one of the legacies of the racial slavery and of the colonial project was a certain kind of anti-blackness of self. And in that anti-blackness of self, we have had a situation where we don't, many of us don't feel that being black is of any importance at all. So what we're trying to do is to map the various instances of anti-blackness around the world, in Brazil, in the United States, in Senegal, South Africa, in Latin America, to map instances of, say, violence against the black body, but also to map instances of the lack of representation of black people in media and in politics and in various other places. So it is really a project of mapping the various instances of anti-blackness around the world and how the black body has been treated or is being treated around the world. We are doing the study typically in a different way. When people do these kind of studies, scholars and so on, what happens is that you get a group of people who are familiar with the data, who know particular country conditions, and then you put them in a room or you ask them to write about certain things to do with the social structures and the societies that they have studied or know. What we have tried to do this time is to do it a little differently. So we began in Rio in last year, April, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And we began there not just with us talking about anti-blackness, violence and the politics and so on, and the ways in which black people are not represented. But we began by also trying to talk to activists who are involved in those struggles. And people who have been thinking about this, and as well as artists. So our methodology is a methodology that is very much a kind of democratic methodology. It's not a methodology of just scholars talking to each other. It's a methodology in which we are engaged with people who are outside of the academy, like artists or like activists. So in South Africa, we were engaged with people who are outside of the academy. In Senegal, as you know, we were engaged with people who are artists. To hear what they have to say. There are a lot of hip-hop artists who turned up at one of the days to talk to us about how they see this question of anti-blackness. So it has been going well because we have been experimenting with trying to do a project that is not one of these expert UN projects, but more or UNESCO projects, but more a project in which there's some participation. It won't be full participation in, because we have time, we have a time constraint and so on. But that it is trying to experiment with different ways to get knowledge about this thing, this phenomenon of anti-black racism. I think one of the main recommendations would be the following: that we will define what anti-black racism looks like for the 21st century. From the perspective of UNESCO, the first definition of racism came in 1952 in Claude Lévi-Strauss, right? In his essay on race and history. That's 70 odd years ago. The configuration and the ways in which anti-black racism has operated does not quite fit some of the things that of that essay. Secondly, that essay was really about what? About trying to say that race has no biological content, that there's no scientific ground at all for us to think about race and racism. What we are saying and trying to do is to say, okay, that is true, absolutely foundational. But yet, after all of that, after the ending of colonialism, after hundreds of years of the ending of racial slavery, anti-black racism still exists. And it's not now just a prejudice that somebody has against somebody. That's not just anti-black racism. It is structural. It structures. It determines people's everyday lives. So that, therefore, what we have to try and think about is, okay, what kind of definition can we now give anti-black racism? And so one of the things that I hope will come out of this particular study is a definition. We are not yet there. We met up until Thursday of this week, and we still have to work through what that definition is. But my hope is that we will be able to have a definition that fits the 21st century, but also, very importantly, a definition that can then say to people, with this definition, we think that these are the steps, the pragmatic steps that you may want to take to challenge and to change anti-black racism in your society. I'm a historian, and what you call it, a political theorist by training. That's my academic training. And certainly, as a historian, I'm taught never to think and predict the future, right? And I'm a little wary about what they always predicting and giving time frames about the future. But I would tell you this, that unless as a human species, as humankind, we confront anti-black racism, we confront in the environment, we confront tremendous inequality in societies and between societies, which is also a contributory factor to anti-black racism. Unless we do those things, the human species and our capacity to live on Earth and to live on Earth in a certain kind of humane way is really seriously diminished. So the way I like to think about it is that the actual survival of the planet, of Earth, not the planet, but of Earth, and the survival of us as a humankind really depends upon us dealing with these things. Whether we deal with them in 50 years or we deal with them in 100 years. But we have to deal and confront them. We have to confront first and deal with them and find mechanisms and ways in which we can reduce the harm to human beings and the harms that are created to human beings in a society in which is constructed through anti-black racism. I think it is really very important that black people, people of African descent, continental Africans, people in the Caribbean, where I'm from, people in Latin America, Brazil, which is the largest African population outside of Africa, people in North America, really need to understand that there is not just a common history that we can talk about, our common aspects of culture. That what we have to talk about is that we actually suffer common oppression, and that we need to begin to identify that common oppression, to think about what it means, to look at the structures of that common oppression, which are global, and then to begin to think about how can we act globally to stop and to mitigate and to get rid of that oppression. One of the most important things that happened was the Durban Conference in 2001, in which there was an attempt to do that. We have not attempted to do that again. But I think that one of the things I am hoping is that this report will stimulate people to think through about, okay, do we need to have something like this again? The report is, the first draft should be ready by May of June next year. It is part of the UN Decade of People of African Descent, which ends in December 24. So my hope is that we will be able to present the report in December 24. That we are living in times that are unusual. That at this moment we are seeing the emergence of social and political forces that have at the heart of their politics and social ideology hostility towards black people. Whether it is in the United States with the rise of Trumpism, whether it is in Europe with the rise of anti-immigration political and social forces, whether it is in the complexity of certain places in Africa, where in fact the ordinary African himself or herself is a victim of a certain kind of political violence, and certain kind of violence is against him or herself in the post-colonial African state. So that we are in the Caribbean, where I am from, where there is a rise towards a move towards some kind of authoritarianism that's a little different. It's not Trumpism, right? That is not the right-wing authoritarianism that we are seeing in Europe, but that there is a move towards a kind of politics in which which are undemocratic. Let me put it that way. So what we are living in is really a moment in which, in my view, those forces who are opposed to progress, those forces who are opposed to black people, those persons, those social forces that don't want to see a different world, are gathering themselves and organizing themselves. So that's why I say it's an unusual time. In that unusual moment, we as black folks have to think about, okay, what do we do? Where do we stand? How do we develop different forms of solidarity between Africans, African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, Brazilians? What are the mechanisms? What are the kind of political forms and social things that we now need to do? What are the cultural things that we need to do that pulls us together so that we can begin to have a front against these forces who are themselves organizing all over the world to turn back the world, and to put it even further back than where we are at the moment. And so that it is actually called back up, quite frankly, a certain kind of what I call black internationalism, a certain ways in which that black internationalism was expressed in the early 20th century through Pan-Africanist Congress, which climaxed in the 1944 Congress in Manchester, with Kwame Nkrumah and Padmore, and then the 74 Congress in Tanzania, held under the auspices of Julius Nyerere, is to call back a certain history that we have, which has been erased. One of the things about this present moment is that it is those social forces that I've talked about have successfully attempted to erase the history that we have, the history of solidarity, the history of working together, and everything becomes like instant coffee, right? So that there was no yesterday. And so that one of the things that we have to do, and what you are doing is really important in this regard, is to what? Is to make sure that we get back that history, that the younger people understand that there's a history from where we stand, and that history is part of what Cabral would call a certain reclamation process. Amilcar Cabral, a certain reclamation process that can mean we stand on it to confront the issues of the present day. My last word is that our people are an extraordinary people, that we have made remarkable contributions to civilization from ever since, but up until today, that even when we are in colonialism and slavery, we have fought back. We have attempted to change the world, and that we can also attempt to change that world, change this world again, and that it may seem a little bit impossible, it may seem a little bit difficult, but it is part of what we are and part of our history, and we need to stand on that history to change the world again.